I have served Edmund Calder, the Duke of Ashfern, for 22 years, and in all that time I never once heard him beg. He was not a man built for it. Tall, spare, with a jaw cut from the same gray limestone as the hall's north wing, he moved through rooms the way weather moves, purposefully, without apology, altering the atmosphere simply by arriving. Footmen straightened. Guests reconsidered their sentences. His late Duchess, God rest her, had loved him fiercely and complained only that he used fewer words in a week than she used before breakfast. When she died, 8 years before the autumn I am about to describe, he used fewer still. The household of Ashfern Hall ran on precision. 34 servants, a physician on quarterly retainer, a secretary who came up from London twice a month, and a steward, myself, Thomas Wren, who managed all of it with a ledger and a whistle-stop memory for detail. Every person in the house had a function, a station, and a clear understanding of the distance between themselves and the Duke. He was civil to us. He was not warm. Nell Barrow was our third housemaid, and she had been with us 11 years. She had come to us young, newly widowed after a brief and difficult marriage to a tenant farmer who left her nothing but a surname and a particular competence with sick rooms. Her husband had been ailing for the final year of their union, and she had nursed him without complaint through every stage of it. She was not remarkable to look at. Middle height, brown hair pinned severely, capable hands that moved without wasted motion. She never asked for advancement. She never sought notice. She arrived early, finished what she started, and had a habit, when she thought no one was watching, of pressing her palm to the cold glass of the upstairs windows and looking out across the grounds with an expression I can only call quiet endurance. I noticed her. I do not think the Duke did, or so I believed that October when the fever arrived. It came on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, His Grace was confined to bed. By Wednesday evening, the physician, Dr. Calloway, had been summoned from the village, had administered what he could, and had sat with me in the corridor outside the Duke's chamber with the look of a man who is about to say something he would rather not. "The fever is acute," he said. "He is strong, and there is every reason to hope. But the next 72 hours will determine it. He requires constant attendance. Cold cloths, fluids when he will take them, watch for the breathing to change. We have the second housemaid, and He requires someone who will not lose her nerve." He looked at me over the rims of his spectacles. "I have seen stout men flee a sick room at the 3rd hour of a bad night, Mr. Wren. The person you station there must be able to endure what they see without either weeping into the sheets or dashing for the door." By Thursday morning, we had discovered exactly how few of Ashfern Hall's 34 servants possessed that quality. The second housemaid lasted 6 hours before the sound of the Duke's breathing, irregular, labored, frightening, sent her out to the corridor in tears and would not be persuaded back. The under-butler, a robust and sensible man in ordinary circumstances, appeared in my office at midnight to inform me, with some dignity, that he was not suited to the work, and to ask whether I had considered writing to London for a professional nurse. The professional nurse arrived Friday at noon, took one look at the patient in the grip of the fever's peak, informed us that her fee would require revision upward, revised it substantially, and withdrew to the servants' hall for what she called a restorative rest. I sat in the corridor and held my ledger and had no immediate solution. Nell Barrow appeared at my elbow. "I'll stay with him," she said. She said it the way she said most things, without preamble, without asking whether it was appropriate, as though it were simply a thing that needed doing, and she had observed that no one else was doing it. She had a basin of cool water in one hand and a fresh cloth folded over her arm. "Mrs. Barrow," I said, "you understand what the physician said. The night will be—" "I nursed my husband for a year," she said. "I know what a bad night looks like. I know what to watch for." She paused. "He needs someone in that room, Mr. Wren." She was right. I knew it, and she knew I knew it, and we stood in the corridor for a moment while the hall breathed around us, the old house settling in the autumn cold, the candles guttering in the draught from the east windows. "Go in," I said. She went in. I have reconstructed what passed in that room over the following 3 days and nights from what Nell herself told me afterward, in pieces, over many months. She was not a woman who told things all at once, and from the journals, which I will come to in their time. I was in and out of the sick room for practical purposes, to bring Dr. Calloway when he made his morning and evening visits, to ensure the fire was tended, to carry out the Duke's instructions when he was lucid enough to give any. What I know is this: Nell did not leave. She cooled his forehead through the worst hours of Friday night when the fever climbed, and the Duke's mind wandered, and he spoke in disjointed fragments to people who were not in the room. His late Duchess by name, once, in a voice so stripped of its usual armor that I, passing the door, had to stand still for a moment. She administered the physician's tisanes and broths with a patience that did not waver when they were refused or spilled, or when the Duke, not himself, not in command of himself, not the austere lord of Ashfern Hall, pressed her hand and would not release it for an hour. She did not document this. She simply bore it and stayed, and did what was needed. It was in the small hours of Saturday morning, when the crisis was at its worst and the Duke lay still, and she had done everything she knew to do and had only to wait, that she permitted herself, for the first time, to look about the room. She told me she had never been in the Duke's private study bedroom before. She had cleaned the anteroom, naturally, but this inner chamber, the sitting room through which visitors did not pass, the desk by the east window, the shelves of correspondence and ledgers, and the personal items a private man keeps private, she had never entered. She looked at it with the careful, non-intrusive attention of someone who had spent 11 years moving through other people's spaces without touching what did not require touching. She noticed the books. She noticed the portrait of the late Duchess above the mantel, the face younger than Nell remembered her, caught in a moment of mid-laugh. She noticed the small, framed sketch of the grounds in summer, amateurishly executed, that the Duke had hung in a place of apparent preference. And then she noticed, on the corner of the desk nearest the window, a pair of plain leather-bound journals stacked one atop the other, the topmost lying open to a page near its end. She told me she had not intended to read them. She had moved to the desk only to trim the candle which had burned low. But the page lay open, and the first line she saw, the line her eye found without seeking it, stopped her entirely. She has a habit of pressing her palm to the cold glass of the upper windows and looking out at the grounds. I do not know what she is looking for. I have found myself, of late, wanting to know. The entry was dated 3 years earlier. The handwriting was the Duke's. She knew it from 11 years of noting it on household orders and correspondence, but changed in quality, careful where it was usually brisk, as if the words had been chosen with unusual attention. She should have closed the journal. She knew it. She told me years after that she has thought about that moment many times, the candle half-trimmed, the Duke's breathing ragged behind her, the open page with its careful lines, and she has never been able to say with confidence that she would do differently. She read. Not quickly, not with any appetite for intrusion. But she read because the line she had seen, she has a habit of pressing her palm to the cold glass, was about her unmistakably, and the mind does not step back easily from finding itself in a place it had no expectation of being. The journals were 2 years' worth of entries, near enough. They were in the main the ordinary records of a man who thought precisely and kept his own counsel, estate business, correspondence, observations on the harvest, notes on his reading. But threaded through them at irregular intervals, sometimes many weeks apart, sometimes several entries in a short span, were the other observations. Small ones, specific ones. The kind a man makes when he is trying to understand something that continues to resist his understanding. Mrs. Barrow corrected young Pierce's error with the laying of the east guest room this morning without either drawing attention to the error or humiliating the boy. I observed it from the corridor. I am not certain she knew I was there. The north orchard wall came down in last night's wind. Mrs. Barrow was the first of the staff I saw this morning, out in the frost, assessing the damage before breakfast. She had a notebook. She was making a list. I have been told she lost her husband some 9 or 10 years past. She wears no outward grief. She carries herself as though she has looked at what life has handed her and found it insufficient and decided, without bitterness, to make something better of her own construction. I find I admire this. I have not said so. I would not know how to say so. The distance of rank prevents it, and there are conventions I have never in my life known how to step around. She looked out the window again this morning. The frost was on the grounds, and she stood with her hand on the glass, and I was coming around the east corridor and stopped. I stood there for, I do not know how long. There is something in the way she endures that I recognize, though I could not explain this to anyone's satisfaction, perhaps not even my own. I have thought about it considerably. There were more, not many. This was not a man who indulged himself in extended sentiment, but enough. An entry from the previous winter in which he had considered, and rejected the idea of speaking to me about her prospects, on the grounds that he did not trust himself to do so without revealing more than was appropriate. An entry from the spring in which he noted that she had arranged the flowers in the east drawing room differently than convention required, and that the result was, inexplicably, both unconventional and perfect. An entry, the most recent, dated 6 weeks before the fever, that said only, "I do not know what I am waiting for. I suspect I am waiting for something that will not arrive unless I take some action, and that the action required is the one thing I do not know how to take." Nell closed the journal. She set it back where it had been. She trimmed the candle. She returned to the chair beside the bed and sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the Duke, gray-faced, diminished, nothing of his usual commanding presence remaining, and did not move for a long time. When Dr. Calloway arrived at 7 in the morning, he found the fever had broken. "Whoever was with him," he said in the corridor to me, "did well, better than well." He recovered slowly. The Duke of Ashford, I should say, did not recover gracefully. He was impatient with his own incapacity in a way that manifested as a very pointed silence, a refusal to ask for anything, and a tendency to attempt things before he was strong enough, and then to be annoyed when the attempt failed. By the end of the first week of November, he was sitting up. By the second week, he was at his desk for an hour a day. By the third, he had resumed the running of the estate, though Dr. Calloway had instructed him not to, and the instruction had been received with the expression the Duke reserved for suggestions he considered well-meant but irrelevant. Through all of it, the household returned to its ordinary rhythms. The professional nurse departed. The servants went back to their stations. Nell Barrow went back to hers, the east wing rooms, the upstairs corridors, the silent early mornings. I noticed that she was quieter than usual. Nell was never a talkative woman, but there is a quality of silence that is simply private, and a quality of silence that is carrying something, and the latter was what I observed in her during those weeks of the Duke's recovery. She did her work. She said what was necessary. She looked out the windows with her palm pressed to the glass, and her expression one I could not, from the corridor, read. The Duke noticed it too. He told me so on a gray Wednesday morning in mid-November when he summoned me to the study, not the sick room, which had been restored to its usual order, but the proper study downstairs, and said without preamble, "The journal's on my desk, the upper pair." I waited. Have they been disturbed? I considered several answers and settled on, "I believe Mrs. Barrow may have had occasion to be near the desk during the worst of your illness, Your Grace. She was in the room for the duration." He was quiet for a moment. His face, still a little drawn from the illness, was unreadable in the way it always was, the deliberate blankness of a man who has decided, at some point long in the past, that his face will not do his feeling for him. "I see," he said. "Shall I speak to her?" I asked. "No," he said, then a pause. "No, I will." He did not immediately. 2 more weeks passed. Lord Callender arrived for a visit, a connection of the family, a large-voiced man with opinions on the proper running of a great house, one of which turned out to be that the Duke's domestic arrangements were insufficiently supervised, another of which was that a housemaid who had served as sick-room attendant without proper qualification or engagement was an irregularity that should be addressed before it set a precedent. He raised this at dinner, the 3rd night of his visit. I was not present, but the footman who served the table told me about it afterward, in the detailed and precise way that footmen communicate important information to stewards. Lord Callender had said, with the certainty of a man who had never once doubted his own judgment, "The woman overstepped." These things want managing before they become habits. The Duke had looked at him across the dinner table, and had said nothing for long enough that Lord Callender had qualified his remark, and then qualified the qualification, and had finally trailed into a somewhat uncertain silence. Then the Duke had said, "Mrs. Barrow stayed at my bedside for 72 hours when everyone else had gone. She did not ask for recognition. She did not ask for anything. I would appreciate it if you did not discuss her as though she were a procedural error." Lord Callender had said, of course only." "She is not an irregularity," the Duke had said, in the tone that ended conversations. "She is the most capable and steadfast person in this house." I should have said so before now. Lord Callender had found reason to cut his visit short the following morning. And the Duke, the morning after that, asked me to send Mrs. Barrow to him. I found her in the east wing corridor with a basket of linen, and told her His Grace wished to see her in the study. She absorbed this information without visible alteration of expression, set down the basket, smoothed her apron, and went downstairs. I lingered. I am not proud of it. I remained within a reasonable distance of the study door for a reason I told myself was professional concern, and which was, in truth, nothing of the kind. I had served Edmund Calder for 22 years. I knew when something was happening that I would wish in future to have witnessed. The door was not fully closed. I heard him say her name, Mrs. Barrow, and heard her answer, Your Grace. And then there was a silence in which I believe a great many things were considered and perhaps reconsidered. Then I heard the Duke say, in a voice I had not heard him use before, stripped of its usual governance, I believe you read them. Another silence, then her voice quiet and steady, Yes. I have been sitting with that fact for 3 weeks, he said. I find I am unable to be displeased about it. A pause. I owe you an explanation, he said. Or perhaps I owe you a great many things. I am not certain where to begin. Her voice, when it came, was the same voice with which she had told me 6 weeks earlier that she would stay with him, direct, without performance, the voice of someone who has learned to say the necessary thing. You don't owe me an explanation, Your Grace. I owe you considerably more than that, he said, and then, I have not known how to say what I wanted to say. The journals were the nearest I came. I am aware that is a poor substitute. I am aware, he stopped. A long pause, the quality of which I could not entirely characterize from the corridor. I am aware that the conventions between us are not straightforwardly navigated. I am also aware that they are conventions, and that I have hidden behind them for considerably longer than was warranted. She said nothing. He said, I would like to speak plainly if you will permit it. Yes, she said, the word was very simple. I have admired you for longer than those journals contain, he said. A great deal longer. I observed it, the quality of what you are, what you bring to your work. I have not the vocabulary for this, Mrs. Barrow. I have never learned it. I am going to try regardless. Another pause, and then with the effortful deliberateness of a man doing something very difficult and doing it anyway. When I was ill and not myself, I am told I held your hand. A silence. Yes, she said softly. I have thought, he said, about what that means, about what a man reaches for when he has no defenses left and is reaching for what is true. He stopped. I would not have you think it was a confusion. I knew whose hand it was. I stood very still in the corridor. The old house breathed around me. From somewhere in the east wing, someone was building up a fire. The distant sound of kindling, of ordinary life continuing. I know I am not, he began, and then stopped and began differently. I am not practiced at this. At whatever it is one does in these circumstances, I know that. I know what I am asking is irregular. I know the distance that is supposed to exist between my station and yours, and I know that it is I who would be asking you to cross it, which is an imposition, and I want. He stopped again. Then more quietly. I want you to know that I am not asking you to cross it for my convenience. I am asking because I cannot think of my life going forward as it has been, which is to say without saying this at minimum. Whatever you choose to do with it. The silence that followed was the longest one. I counted it without meaning to, and reached somewhere past a minute before Nell Barrow spoke. When I read the journals, she said slowly, I thought at first I had misunderstood. I read it again. I thought a man like you doesn't. She stopped. Then steadily, I have lived in this house for 11 years and I have given it everything I had because it was what I had to give. I did not think anyone noticed. I did not think, she stopped again, and when she resumed her voice was very careful in the way of someone navigating something that matters. You wrote about the windows, about the frost on the grounds. Yes, he said. I was looking at the oak at the far edge of the north field, she said. It's the largest tree I've ever seen. I've looked at it every morning for 11 years. I find it, I don't know, steadying. A pause. I didn't think anyone could see me from that corridor. I could see you, he said. I have always been able to see you. He said it without drama, without ornamentation, the way he said most things, plainly and with complete meaning. I have simply not, until now, said so. The sound I heard then was brief and small and wholly human. A breath, or the close equivalent of one, the kind drawn by a person who has been holding something for a long time and has unexpectedly been given permission to set it down. Your Grace, she said. Edmund, he said very quietly, if you will. Another silence. Then her voice, the same steady voice, but with something in it I had not heard there before, something loosened. Edmund. I believe I walked back to my office at that point, because there are things a man of 22 years' service knows are not his to witness, and the rest of what passed in that study was one of them. I will tell you what I know of the outcome, as it arranged itself in the weeks and months following. Lord Callender wrote a letter. It was not responded to in a manner that encouraged further correspondence. Lady Pembury, a connection of the late Duchess with strong opinions about what was and was not done, arrived in December for what she described as a pastoral call and departed with slightly less composure than she had brought. The household of Ashfern Hall absorbed the developments with the particular equanimity of people who had watched their employer fight a fever for 3 days and had drawn their own conclusions about where the credit for his survival resided. Nell Barrow was engaged to the Duke of Ashfern on the 15th of December, in the drawing room, in the presence of myself and Mrs. Hatch the housekeeper, who cried, and the under-butler, who did not but came close. She continued, in the months between engagement and marriage, to press her palm to the glass of the upper windows on winter mornings. The difference was that he began, on occasion, to stand beside her. I watched them once. I was not, I confess, being entirely accidental about it, on a January morning when the frost was heavy on the grounds and the great oak at the edge of the north field stood black against a white sky. They were side by side at the east corridor window, not touching, looking out. He said something. She said something back. He pointed at the oak, and she turned to look at him with an expression I had not seen on her face in 11 years of daily observation. The expression of a person who has been surprised into being known. He was not a man built for begging, but he learned that winter to ask. And Nell Barrow, who had never in her life asked for anything that was given rather than earned, learned what it was to be offered something freely. They were married in March, in the chapel on the Ashfern grounds, in a ceremony attended by the household entire, and a small number of family connections, whose feelings about the matter ranged from doubtful to reconciled, and who found, in the course of the afternoon, that the woman their relation had chosen was considerably more difficult to dismiss in person than in principle. The oak was in bud. The north field was beginning to green. Nell Barrow, Nell called her, as of that afternoon, stood in the chapel door after the ceremony with the Duke's hand in hers and looked out at the grounds with her expression of quiet endurance, except that it was no longer quite that. I have been a steward for a long time. I have seen the machinery of great houses in operation, and I know what it costs and what it produces. I know that most of what happens inside these walls is practical and functional, and conducted at a careful distance that keeps everyone in their proper station and the whole enterprise running smoothly. I know also that the most important things that happen inside these walls are the ones that break that distance open, fever and frost, and a pair of leather journals left open on a desk at the wrong moment, or the right one. He loved her for years in the only language he knew how to speak, which was the private one. She came to him through the worst 3 days of his life without being asked, which was the language she knew. What happened after was simply the two of them learning to speak the same one.